Okay, so let's talk about the president. Um, First, Barack Obama is the president. He's the 44th president. In order to become president, you have to be at least 35 years of age. You have to take an oath that's in the Constitution. It's the only oath that's in the Constitution. Um, It says things like to uphold and defend the Constitution, and it's administered by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And you have to be a naturalized, born U.S. citizen. You have to be born in the U.S. to be president. So yeah, there have been 44 presidents in the United States, 44 presidents in U.S. history, the 44th being Obama. Each president is limited to 2 terms in office. A term is 4 years, so each president gets 2 4-year terms. This was a tradition set up originally by George Washington. It wasn't a hard and fast rule, but it was one of those informal rules that presidents followed, that they would only run for 2 terms of office, because George Washington stepped down after his second term, having 8 years in office. The informal rule was broken by Franklin Delano Roosevelt during the Great Depression and World War II, as he and Americans didn't necessarily want to change horses mid-crisis. So that happened. Roosevelt won 4 terms in office, served 12 years. Whatever. That was me swatting a gnat, by the way. Okay. So he served roughly 12 years in office. He was elected in 32. He died in 45. And then, my goodness, Harry Truman became president after Roosevelt died. In 1951, an amendment was passed saying that the president could only serve 2 terms in office, couldn't serve as many terms as he or she wanted to. Part of the reason for that is because the president gets to appoint members to the judiciary, members to, the cabinet, ambassadors, all those things, especially in the judiciary. Over time, the president's power can grow through the judicial branch of government. And if the executive, judicial, and legislative branches are all meant to have checks and balances on each other to prevent one branch of government or one person from gaining too much power, if the president is in office for 16, 20, 24 years, no matter how popular they are and how much the American people love them and want to keep re-electing them, that president's going to, by the 16th year, probably has dominated the judicial branch, has appointed so many people to be judges throughout the nation that they are at least ideologically aligned with the president, which means the judicial branch is no longer a very effective check on president's power. While members of the judiciary, federal appellate court judges in the Supreme Court have lifetime appointments, so they can make rulings without having to care what the person who appointed them or the political party that they may sort of feel an attachment to, what they think. The fact still is that the president will appoint people that think, or at least the president thinks along the lines as they do. So if you have a situation where a president's been in office for, let's say, 24 years, and they've somehow gotten to appoint all 9 members of the Supreme Court. The president has effectively taken over the judicial branch at that point also. Thus, that's why the amendment was put into effect, limiting the president to 2 terms in office. How do we get a president? President's elected through the Electoral College. The Electoral College is a system where each state is given a certain number of votes in the or a certain number of votes to vote for president. North Carolina has 15 votes, Texas has 38, Maine has 4. For example, these votes correspond to the number of representatives that state has in Congress. So, Montana has 1 member in the House of Representatives and 2 members in the Senate. They have 3 members in the legislature altogether, and they also have 3 votes in the Electoral College. All states get, the number of votes that they have in the Congress, and D.C., which doesn't have any senators or any representatives, any voting representatives, D.C. also gets 3 electoral votes. That came about in the 70s. Actually, D.C. wasn't able to vote even for the president until then. So, what happens is we, as North Carolinians, go to the polls and we vote. What we're voting for, we vote for a president, but what we're sort of really voting for is a slate of electors, a delegation, it's another synonym, a group of people that will go to the Electoral College and vote on our behalf for president. Now, by tradition, the people that we elect go there and vote for whoever gets the most votes in the state. So in 2008, Obama got the most votes, so the 15 electors were selected who would vote for Obama. In 2012, Romney got most of the votes, so the electors would vote for Romney. But there's nothing sort of constitutionally requiring this, so theoretically those 15 electors could go to the Electoral College and vote for whoever they wanted to, but that very rarely happens. So we're a nation dominated by a 2-party system, the Democrats and Republicans. How do we know who's going to be the Democratic nominee for president, and who do we know is going to be the Republican nominee for president? We do this via primaries. So each party has a primary system where many candidates within the party run for the party nomination. So in 2008, it was Obama, Hillary Clinton, John Edwards, Dennis Kucinich, Joe Biden, Bill Richardson was in there. In 2012, there was theoretically a Democratic primary for president, but when your party has control of the White House and the president, it says they're going to run for another term of office, that's who they're going to get on the ticket. In 2012, the Republicans had Mitt Romney, Rick Santorum, Michelle Bachmann, I think, was in there for a little bit. Ron Paul. I don't think Mike Huckabee ran in 2012. There are a couple others. Anyway, nobody really exciting for the Republican Party. So these primaries, so the candidates for the party to be the party's presidential nominee go from state to state. Okay, they go from state to state and run in their elections, just like there would be for the president, the official presidential election. Each state, the party gives each state a number of delegates, just like in the Electoral College, and those delegates go to the party's presidential convention, and at the convention they vote for the candidate. If, Mitt Romney, when Mitt Romney runs in North Carolina, Mitt Romney gets a majority of the votes that the Republican Party has given to North Carolina will go to Mitt Romney at the Republican Presidential Convention. Now, presidential conventions are held in August and early September. Each party holds a week-long convention. They hold them separate from each other, so one week the Republicans will do theirs, and the next week the Democrats will do theirs. They tend to alternate. So Republicans will go first, Democrats will go second, then Democrats go first, Republicans second. The convention is a chance for the presidential candidate to get their message out without having to worry about the other presidential candidate having any airtime, essentially. So during the Democratic convention, the Democratic presidential candidate will essentially have at least 4 days to non-stop have their message pumped through the airways at the American people. Then the Republican, during their convention, will have their message. It's a great chance for the American people to be introduced to the candidate, or if the candidate has an image that is not favorable, to be reintroduced to the American public. And it's also a chance for the party to introduce up-and-coming politicians. So, in the electoral college, there's a history of favoritism, kind of, in the electoral college, or at least more recently. On the face of it, the Electoral College would seem to favor Republican presidential candidates based upon the way, how the states vote. Smaller states are disproportionately favored in the Electoral College system. Montana has 1 million people in it, let's say, and they get 3 votes. So 300,000 people in Montana each get 1 electoral vote, if you want to divide it up that way. North Carolina has 15 electoral votes, and in North Carolina there's roughly, say, 700,000 people per electoral vote, which means Republicans need to win less of the American people's vote to win the presidency, at least theoretically, again, because the smaller states, which are also the smaller states in terms of population, which are also more numerous, have a greater, or have an overrepresentation in the Electoral College. Montana's weight based upon its population is greater than New York's weight, even though New York has more electoral votes. Hope that makes sense. So, and the states that are more populous are the ones that tend to go Democratic. If you look at a map of the Electoral College, you'll see that the country is a lot of red, showing the conservative domination of the smaller states in terms of, again, population. Blue, where the Democratic presidents have won, are confined to the larger states, which are less numerous. But that doesn't explain the whole story. So in the past couple of years, we've had these demographic trends where Hispanic voters coming in, moving to North Carolina, becoming an increasingly larger population in Nevada, California, New Mexico, even Colorado, and we have a large Hispanic population in North Carolina, one of the, I think, fourth largest in the country. In Virginia, spillover from D.C., from very liberal D.C., with more people populating the Northern Virginia suburbs. The Northern Virginia suburbs being, having a very strong now young liberal base. They're professionals that work in D.C., but they live in, Alexandria, Virginia, Arlington, things like that. With these demographic shifts, we see that the Democrats hold a very significant advantage in the Electoral College system right now over Republicans, even though you would tend to think Republicans would hold an advantage because of the small states having a larger share of the or having a disproportional vote in the Electoral College. The Democratic votes have just been spread the appropriate way across the country to give them this advantage. If you look at the past, what year is it? 2014? 20 years, the past 92, 96, 2000, 2004, 2008, 2012, the past 6 presidential elections, 169 electoral votes have gone for the Democrats from the same states every single election. The Republicans have 156 electoral votes that they've won in every single election. So the Democrats already have a 40 vote advantage there. Now, based upon recent demographic trends, we can kind of say that there are around 240 to 260 moderately safe Democratic electoral votes, and you only need to get 270 to win. So if the Democratic presidential candidate can go into an election already counting on about 240 electoral votes, they only need to find 30 more electoral votes to win, and the Republican needs to find 100 or more. You see the Democratic candidate has the advantage. Swing states during the presidency right now kind of include Florida, Virginia, North Carolina, Ohio, Colorado, Nevada, Iowa, and that's kind of it. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin will often be considered swing states. Michigan may be considered a swing state, but Democrats have held a pretty significant advantage in those states over the past, 20 some odd years. Obama running for president based upon trends really only needed to win a couple of those swing states, while Romney had to practically win all of them to win the presidency. And that looks like it's going to be the same for the 2016 and 2020 presidential election, at least if trends continue. So, presidential powers. So the president has to get power to appoint members to the cabinet and to the judiciary. However, those appointments must be confirmed by the Senate. That is a check that the Senate has on the power of the president. Now, the president has a check on the power of the Senate in the sense that the Senate can only confirm an appointment that the president has made to an office. So, if there's a vacancy at the Supreme Court, the Senate gets to confirm somebody to hold that vacancy or to go into that vacancy to become a Supreme Court justice. However, the president has the power to appoint a person, and the Senate can only vote on somebody the president appoints. Check and balance between the two. Since we mentioned the cabinet, let's talk about what the cabinet is. So the president is the head of the executive branch. The executive branch runs the government and enforces laws passed by Congress. Congress passes laws, passes bills, the president signs them into law, and then the president and the executive branch carry out the laws, run the country. The president runs the country via the cabinet, which is each department in government. So, Department of Defense, the Department of State, Attorney General's Office, Department of Energy, Department of Education, Veterans Affairs. These are all cabinet-level offices. These form the cabinet. These are the agencies that run the federal government, that perform the functions that our federal government performs. The president gets to appoint the heads of these cabinet positions. This is a very significant power in that the head of the cabinets set policy for the agency and focus and direct the agency's energies. A Republican head of the Environmental Protection Agency will set policy for the agency that make it hard for the agency to do its job, or will direct the agency's energies away from going out and enforcing or environmental protection laws, or providing significant fines on companies that violate environmental protection laws. A Democratic president will appoint somebody to head the Environmental Protection Agency that will likely be a little more dogged in enforcing the country's environmental protection laws. So, in appointing the heads of the departments, the president has that significant power in setting policy for how the government runs, and how the federal government carries out the functions that Congress tells it to carry out. Now, Congress can perform a check on those agencies by calling members of those agencies before congressional committees, questioning them on what they're doing, telling them that they should be doing something else, threatening to cut off their funding, doing things like that. The Congress can pass legislation that modifies what a executive agency can or cannot do if they don't like what that agency is doing. Of course, the president has to sign that into law. It's a significant power. There is some check on it by Congress, but it's still pretty big. Now, so the cabinet runs the government. The cabinet is distant from the president. So the cabinet is representative of sort of the president's agenda, president's ideology, what the president cares about. However, again, the departments or the cabinet, the secretaries of the departments are busy running the government. They don't really have a lot of time to brush elbows with the president and get specific orders from the president, except for maybe some of the really important cabinet leaders. The other level of the executive office, though, and the one that's closer to the president, is the executive office of the president. These, the people in the executive office of the president are the president's sort of eyes and ears. They help keep the president informed of what's going on in the nation. They inform the president of what appropriate course of action should be. So these agencies that make up the executive office of the president include the offices of the Office of Budget and Management, which is similar to the Congressional Budget Office, but a little more partisan because it's the member of because the president gets to appoint the people to run it. Others are the National Security Council, the Council of Economic Advisors, the Office of Science and Technology. The members of these of this executive office, all those are appointed by the president and are ideologically aligned with the president. The president, they know what the president's values are, and they help keep the president informed of, what's going on in a way the president wants to hear it, if that makes sense. So the president will say something like, I think it's important for us to raise taxes on multi-millionaires. Tell me what a good tax rate would be and what the effects of that will be. And the Office of Budget Management will go about and do that, present a plan to the president, tell the president this is probably what is best, or we'll say here are a couple options. President Obama, in this case, you could raise taxes on on people making over $1 million and raise it by 5%, or you could raise taxes on those making over $5 million a year and raise it by 10%. Here's the amount of money generated. Here are the effects on the economy. Which one do you want to do? Type thing. And the president will choose from the options given, and thus, and we'll push that agenda. It's actually, this actually leads some people to call the president the most powerful and most controlled person in the world. The president has immense power. So the president's the leader of the strongest military, the largest economy, the most important nation right now in the entire world. The president has the power to direct policy in the nation and to speak for that nation and things like that, to negotiate with other countries, to scold other countries if necessary. However, the president has a lot on his or her table, and thus relies very heavily on the expertise of others, and can be effectively controlled based upon that expertise. Obama has ideas and is a smart guy and knows what he wants to get done and has a rough outline of things, and those, that outline is filled in by his executive office. But if people in the executive office decide that Obama's not really smart, they can just, feed him information and direct him in ways that they want him to go instead of ways that he wants to go. And thus the president can be the most powerful and most controlled person in the world. Anyway, side note, kind of. So we have the executive office of the president and the cabinet. Both are responsible to the president. Both are representatives of the president. Both, are responsible for carrying out the will of the president. However, the cabinet is distant from the president because they are more concerned with running the day-to-day operations of the government, whereas the executive office is closer to the president, and they are the president's eyes and ears. They're helping the president know what's going on in the world. Okay, so talked about appointments, the cabinet. The president is commander-in-chief of the army. It's a very important power in any nation, and it's one that gets a lot of talk. The president can deploy troops into nations, or can not deploy troops in the nations. The president has control of the military. If you look on slide 16 of the PowerPoint, I talk about the sort of how the president actually carries that authority. So the president is in control of the military. What this generally means is the president sets policy and provides a broad, some type of broad agenda for the military. So the president says, we're going to go into Iraq and remove Saddam Hussein. The military says, yes, sir. And then they go about saying, the actual leaders of the military, the generals, the army commanders, the people that know military tactics, they're the ones that actually devise, okay, we're going to send the 4th Infantry here, we're going to use aerial bombardment to do this. They execute the president's plans. I point this out because it has been asked a lot of, why would we let Obama or Bush or Clinton or Bush or Reagan or Carter, just listen presidents back in time, let them be lead the military, because they don't know anything about military tactics. True. Except I think the senior Bush was in World War II maybe, or the Korean War. Anyway, yes, they don't know that. They don't know military tactics, and thus they're not the ones actually carrying out the attacks that they order. The president says, hey, I want to attack Iraq. The military says, okay, here's some kind of options. You can go with this limited strike where we, just launch some cruise missiles into the nation to take out some areas. Do you want to occupy the nation and bring democracy? If so, we can do this option, which has, we can do this option of nuking Baghdad, which brings this level of risk, this level of civilian casualties, this is what we can expect. Or you can do this option, which involves a month of aerial bombardment and then sending in troops. Or you can do this option, which does this things, and they'll provide casualty projections, civilian casualty projections, chances of succeeding, length of time, cost, things like that to the president, and the president will then make decisions, balancing, theoretically he's balancing the will of the political of the American public and foreign policy concerns. So the president will say, capturing Saddam Hussein is a larger priority, maybe, than making sure civilians are not killed. So let's nuke Baghdad. I guess you wouldn't really capture Saddam, you'd kill him then. But, the president could say that, theoretically. The military, though, will carry out the operation itself. The president doesn't carry out tactical things. Now there's a division of power between Congress and the president. The president sets military policy, can order the military into certain areas. However, Congress has the power to declare war. Now, the president is responsible with defending the nation and can use the military to respond to threats without needing to talk to Congress about it. However, if the president wants to have extended engagement in any situation or wants to preemptively attack a nation, theoretically, the president needs congressional approval to do so, and maybe even have the Congress declare war on the nation. However, the Congress's power to control the president's use of the military has very much weakened over the past 100-ish years. So much, in fact, that we had a long-running war in Korea and Vietnam without Congress ever declaring war. We've had Clinton used to routinely bomb Iraq and bomb lots of other African nations and bomb just lots of places around the world. Clinton liked to bomb people. Would bomb people without congressional approval. Would only do so for a few days, though, usually. In 1973, there was something called the War Powers Resolution Act. Congress passed this act in an effort, passed it over Nixon's veto even. It was passed in an effort to rein in the president's sort of control and ability to use the military. The War Power Resolution Act gave the president the authority to use the military in a nation for 90 days. Had to inform Congress of what he was doing, but pretty much could use the military for 90 days. After that 90 days was up, the president had to get congressional approval to continue to use the military after that. Presidents have largely ignored that congressional act that was passed, routinely going over the 90 days without asking for congressional approval, and Congress has largely allowed the president to ignore it because when the president sends troops into a nation or bombs people, there's a lot of pressure in Congress to grant the president a lot of authority to do what he or she thinks is right for the nation and to prevent troops from being killed and things like that. So Obama, for example, recently in Libya was involved in military actions in Libya longer than the 90 days. A lot of people felt that was unconstitutional. There was some talk about, him breaking the law, but even though, nothing is really done about it in Congress because everybody does it. Every president does it. Anyway, I bring this up because an interesting example of what Obama wanted to do or almost did with regards to the War Power Resolution Act is Obama actually kind of thought, maybe I'll follow this law for once in my life. So in Syria, there's a conflict. Obama was threatening to bomb Syria. However, Obama decided he would ask Congress first for approval to strike in Syria. It became clear that Obama was not going to get that approval from Congress. It became kind of a big issue. David Cameron in Britain wanted also to bomb Syria with America. However, the Parliament gave him a stunning defeat, not allowing him to bomb Syria like he wanted to. And the same thing was going to happen to Obama. Luckily, John Kerry rode in on his white horse and saved Obama from being thoroughly embarrassed, because Kerry was able to broker an agreement with Russia and Syria that Syria would turn over its chemical weapons to be dismantled, and thus Obama wouldn't need to bomb Syria. So yeah, very interesting political dynamic involved with the War Powers Resolution Act and the sort of congressional and executive power, how they fight each other for power. Example of a check and balance there. And so one power the president has, the president's elected by the American people, all of them, elected in that the president is the only one that is the only member of the government that all of the American people have a voice in electing, and thus whoever wins the presidency is seen as speaking for the American people, regardless of how close the election was, because the president has that authority, the president can drive the nation's political agenda. If the president is concerned about immigration becomes the number one priority of the nation. The president's concerned about taxes, healthcare, the environment. Those things become the priority of the nation. This is because, again, the president is seen as speaking for all American people. Also, the president is the head of, or is seen as the singular head of the federal government. They're the head of the executive branch, and there's only one head of the executive branch, the president. In Congress, you have 535 members, 100 in the House and 435 in the Senate. All have different ideas, different agendas, and it's hard for any one of them to command the attention of the American people like the president does. Thus, that gives the president enormous power to, again, drive the political agenda. This driving of the political agenda is known as a legislative initiative. The president has the power of the legislative initiative, which is an informal power. The president doesn't act, and it means to sort of drive what Congress does, to say, Congress, hey, let's focus on immigration, or let's focus on healthcare, or let's focus on guns. The president doesn't really have this power, however, because, in a constitutional sense, but because the president has command of the nation, the president has the power of the bully pulpit, which is, the power to run around and say, we should do this, let's do this, and to do it all over the nation, just thus gathering nationwide support for the president's goals. Congress kind of has to at least pay attention to what the president wants. So, yeah. A lot of the other stuff is on there. Those are some big things. Look at the types of powers on slide 25. Executive orders is a power the president has. Executive orders have a lot of controversy around them. If you're a party that's not in power, executive orders are a tyrannical overreach of the president to establish a kingdom of that president in America and deprive all Americans of their freedoms, and violating the Constitution at the same time. If you're supportive of the president. If the president is a member of your political party, then executive orders are a natural extension of the president's constitutional authority. Now, executive orders are things that the president orders the government to do, his cabinet to do, or her cabinet to do. Now, the president can only issue executive orders within his or her constitutional authority, what the Constitution allows the president to do, and within the president's statutory authority, what Congress has allowed the president to do. So the president cannot issue an executive order saying everybody makes over $1 million has to pay a minimum of 35% of their income in taxes. That's something Congress has to do. That's a law. The president can, however, issue an executive order saying, hey, immigration, let's focus on finding and deporting people that have committed violent crimes that are undocumented immigrants, and let's not even try and deport people that have, come here, are undocumented, and are, abiding by the law, or are, were brought here when they were 5 and have lived here for the past 20 years, even though they don't have any papers. It's not their fault. They consider themselves Americans. Let's not separate families, uproot their life, etc. Those are executive orders. The president has authority to do that, both by the Constitution and by the power that Congress has delegated to the executive branch through legislation. But it still doesn't mean that every single time a president issues an executive order, the party that is not the president's party, they're going to complain a lot. So, anyway. That's the executive branch and the president. Hope that was informative and useful.